Roberta Cooper Ramo, who is a product of Mexico, had the audacity at a time in the American Bar Association's history when there had never been a woman president to shatter a glass ceiling. Many people thought probably it wasn't possible. Roberta never takes the easy way on anything. She ran the race and had opposition. She was a dynamic woman, an incredible lawyer, full of energy, and full of ideas and vision for a profession that really included everyone. I wasn't in the House of Delegates or on the nominating committee, but I understand that she endured 88 ballots before she was finally declared the winner. She took the nation by storm. I looked at her calendar one day when she was serving as president, and she literally had to schedule in time for her anniversary because she was so much in demand. And wherever she went, she really took the message of the rule of law, of lawyers, and of inclusion everywhere she went. She transformed the American Bar Association. Now she serves as president of the American Law Institute, a nationally recognized, in fact, a leading organization that is designed to improve, clarify, and restate the law. It's made up of academics, lawyers, judges, and those who care about and understand the prominence and the role of law in our society. Roberta is a partner in the law firm of Modrell Sperling. She is the quintessential phenomenal woman, an incredible lawyer. Her voice is elevated many, many causes, and she makes all of us proud to be lawyers, and she helps us understand what it means, what the role of the lawyer is in society today, and our obligations really as lawyers and beyond. Please join me in giving a hearty welcome to Roberta Cooper Ramo. She's also my friend.
You know, I'll just walk around. Thank you so much. Well, some of that was true. What was not true, Bernice, is after 88 ballots, I lost. And then about some years later, I don't remember exactly, Jay might remember, but maybe 3 or 4 years later, I didn't know this till afterwards. First, my partners got a phone call from the same 10 people that had encouraged me to run in the first place. And then my husband got a call suggesting that they thought this was a good idea, and that's okay. And then they called me, and I said, "Are you guys out of your mind? I lost after 88 ballots." I mean, it's pretty clear. But the part that Bernice said that was true is that I do have a little bit of a hard head, and I thought, well, maybe if I lose again, then the next woman will have an opportunity. Let me say, I've been sitting here for the last hour, and I sometimes when I give a talk, I try to come just to make sure I don't repeat something that people have said before. In this case, combined with a meeting I was at the White House a week ago, Tuesday I think it was, these two experiences have been transformational for me. And I want to thank everybody that is in this room, but then I want to tell you there are some things you have to do for the rest of us, not just for your clients. Because last week when I was at the White House, I understood for the first time in one of the panels that this business of keeping poor people in prison for fines fines that they couldn't pay was not just isolated, which I thought it was. I mean, we all read the outrageous cases that we read in the New York Times, and I think, boy, I won't name the state, but that doesn't happen anywhere else. And then, 3 or 4 years later, there'll be another one. And I was stunned to see a panel of state Supreme Court justices, each of whom were basically laying out the case in their own states in which they didn't have the power really to do much about it because of what the state law is, and begging the Legal Services Corporation to somehow find people to work more in this area, although it's that crossover between civil and criminal in some ways. But more importantly, I think telling everyone in this room that the debtors' prisons that I read about with fascination, reading mainly English novels, we have in our very own country. I come here today, again, and I think of myself as an informed lawyer who's interested in the justice system in every way and try to be a good citizen, to find maybe there's hope in this, and that is I completely misunderstood the breadth of the problems with solitary confinement. I had never thought, I'm embarrassed to tell you before, much about the mental illness part of this. And the hopeful part, but also what I guess is disturbing to me, is that it sounds to me like we know how to fix some of this. And yet we have not somehow been able to go from the scientific information and the experiments that have been done in places like Colorado to actually fix the problem nationally. Those two things together make me say to you something that I heard Justice Sotomayor say in New Mexico about 2 weeks ago. She came to speak at St. John's College. Some of you may know, there's one in Indianapolis that many of you may know about. It's sort of a great books college, and the occasion was actually part of a book tour because her autobiography, which if you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it. It's not only an easy read, it's really important. Had just come out in paperback, and that's what engendered this. So what was interesting to me is that two things. One made me kind of sad, although I was happy to see it, and that is how much security was there. There is so much, in my mind, inappropriate anger by public figures right now that even Supreme Court justices these days, in very, what seem to me, safe circumstances, really have to have a great deal of security, and that hurt me a little bit. But she made this point, so she said, after answering the questions that had been prepared for her, she said that she would walk around the audience and she would answer some questions with the usual understandings. This was a lay audience. One is she wouldn't answer any question about any cases in front of them. She wouldn't answer any questions about cases that might be in front of them. She wouldn't talk about presidential candidates. She wouldn't talk about the Supreme Court nomination process and where it is. But other than that, she pretty much answered any question. So people asked careful, thoughtful questions. And then the last person she called on was a woman who I think hadn't fully processed all that. And she said, Justice Sotomayor, I want to ask you about the immigration system. So Justice Sotomayor, of course, immediately said, we have cases about that all the time. I can't really answer any of those things. And then she paused for a second and said something that relates to what we've just been talking about to me. And that is, she said, laws don't happen to you. She said, you elect people who pass these laws, and either you're not paying attention to the elections or you're not representing the problems that are caused by the laws, sometimes unintended and nobody understood, and sometimes pretty much anybody that knew anything would know what was going to happen. And so she didn't cut to the chase quite this way, but her point was, don't complain to me about it. What I feel so both energized about and sad about and angry about in equal portions, having been to this White House conference and hearing what I just heard, is that I don't think the American people honestly understand the facts of either of those situations. I think there are isolated pockets of people who are racist, hate poor people, think everybody ought to, but honestly, my own view is that we as lawyers have not done enough and have not communicated well enough to our fellow American citizens about what this is all about. And I have no idea how the heck to do it, but I think part of, when I was thinking about talking to you, then I'll say in a minute what I was really thinking about when Judge Donald called me, I thought, we're the people who, this is the criminal justice section. It's not the criminal law section. And I so appreciate that difference. And so if we're the American Bar Association criminal justice section, then obviously part of what we need is justice. And that's justice for victims and justice for everybody, but it's making sure to the extent we can that the justice system actually works. And I think we have failed as lawyers in our individual communities at explaining to our friends who are not lawyers what this is all about. As I was coming in, I walked through 1,000 Rotarians. Have you guys been walking through Rotarians? I was trying to think, I could do a country song called like Swimming Through Rotarians or something, I don't know. Although it's not as good as I've got tears in my ears from lying on my back crying out my heart over you. But now, after I did all that, I was so sorry I hadn't come here first, because I would have gone into that giant room and demanded to speak to all those kids and those what looked to me like at least 600 Rotarians about the facts of both of these things. Well, every place you are, there are Rotary clubs. There are everything. How many of us, including me, have taken the time, and they're desperate for speakers usually, have taken the time to call and say, my mission is to explain what's wrong with the justice system right now. And now is a perfect time to do that, in my mind, because so many states have so many important financial problems, some of which are being caused, and California is a perfect example, by this over-incarceration that went on and all the things we did in my own state. I worry about private prison systems and other things. So I have to say to you that I will go forth from here, and I expect each of you, and I hope the section, will think a whole lot more about this issue. Now, I'll tell you what I really thought when Bernice called me. So, anybody here from New Mexico, and those of you that know me very well will know I know nothing about criminal law. And you would wonder why in the world did a distinguished federal judge invite her to come. I'm here, I'm cheap, it didn't cost anything to fly me in, I don't have a plane to come, I can give you restaurant recommendations, there are a lot of reasons. But I don't apologize for the weather, let me tell you that, because we need the rain, and I'm not saying it's bad in any way, and I hope you'll eat some good green and red chili and it will take care of all your problems. But I did have a little insight into the criminal justice system. And I really have often thought that every young lawyer, every law student, should be required to have some sort of interaction with the criminal justice system when they start out. Not because they're going to be criminal defense lawyers or prosecutors, but because they're going to be lawyers in the American justice system. And if you don't understand what doesn't work, or if you don't see how it really works, then it's hard to be an advocate in the way I'm talking about. So when I started practice in Albuquerque, I was the first woman in a major law firm here. And there were only, as I recall, there were 4 or 5 women in practice, but there were only 2 of us that were in law firms. And this was so long ago, there were no public defenders. None. You think the system is bad now with few public defenders? There were no public defenders. And so knowing that the senior partner of this very large and prestigious firm was kind of a soft touch, and hearing that they'd hired a woman, a shock to everyone's system, I got appointed for, it seemed to me forever, it was probably about 9 months, every indigent female criminal, okay, who didn't have a lawyer, and there were a lot of them. I was their lawyer. I had no idea what I was doing most of the time, but 85% of the time, if they didn't have a lawyer, it was like they caught them with the television set and there was a large Polaroid picture, so it wasn't that hard. But I finally got a case in which there could be a significant felony conviction, and I didn't even feel competent representing the person in the very first hearing. But I couldn't find a real criminal lawyer, we're talking about a matter of 2 days, that would do this. So I called a man named Bill Kitts. And this tells you something about, I think, wonderful about lawyers in Albuquerque, and it also tells you about how we're all supposed to be on both ends of the spectrum. And Bill was a well-known, very excellent criminal defense lawyer. And I called him and I said, Mr. Kitts, I told him what had happened, and I said, I'm not asking you to take the case right now. I said, I'll represent her. I said, but do you mind having a cup of coffee with me to tell me what I'm supposed to do in this case so I don't screw it up so that, she gets like a capital offense for what she did, which I assure you was not a capital offense. And he very nicely, we went to have a cup of coffee downtown, and 3 hours later, after taking copious notes, I felt like I was ready to go. I stayed up almost all night doing every bit of research I could possibly do to make sure that if anything came up, including Magna Carta, I was ready to go. In fact, I was particularly good on Magna Carta, which, as it happened, never came up. And you know how when you are sitting somewhere and you feel like somebody is looking at you from behind? All good lawyers know when that happens. And I just had this feeling as they were bringing my client in that there was somebody looking at me, and I look, and there at the very back of the courtroom is Bill Kitts. Now, he told me later, after I had done the right thing, that he was only coming to see what a magnificent teacher he was. But I knew that he was really there because if I screwed up, he would get up, walk down to the well of the court, and save my client. And that is the kind of humanity and action that can happen in what was then a small town that just doesn't happen much anymore. And I wanted to say to each of you that I hope you tell law students and young lawyers, and I hope you help make it possible for them to have something like this experience. When I was in law school at Chicago, we had one class with medical students, and it was about law and psychiatry. And it was half medical students and half law students. And it was important, I think, for all of us. It took us almost a whole quarter to learn how to talk to each other. I was married to a doctor, so I did really well in that class. And I started looking at the mental health facilities in Chicago, and that's when they forced people to take Thorazine, and they also had them take it through their hearings of competency. So you can imagine, those of you that have done any, you know more about this than I do, how little anyone ever objected to being put away for mental health reasons because they had no idea what was happening to them. And again, seeing that as a young law student changed my view as a citizen, not just as a lawyer, about how things work. And I think there are just so few of us involved in the system itself that part of what we have to do is make sure as citizens we're doing the best we can to explain to the rest of the folks what in the world is going on. Justice O'Connor, who is a favorite of both of ours, as you all know, has made a big issue really while she was on the bench, but particularly since she left the Supreme Court, about trying to get civics back in. And part of what has happened to us is we have poorly educated American citizens. My new thing that I haven't figured out how to do yet is I want all high school students in New Mexico to have to take the same test that people who want to be citizens in America take to graduate. They have to know how to swim in some places. There are all kinds of things we ask them to do, but we never require them to know, because they were lucky enough to be born here, most of them, how in the world they're supposed to behave as citizens. So that is, those are comments that I make to you precipitated by my sitting here, both in horror and appreciation for what all of you are doing. Let me speak for just a minute or two about the American Law Institute and our work in the criminal justice section. Some of you may know, I hope all of you may know, that we're the group that put together the Model Penal Code. No one ever passed the entire Model Penal Code, but when it was put together in 1960, it had some amazingly forward-thinking things in it. For example, there was the death penalty, which Bernice was there that day, I think. We have now revoked, but it said, shockingly to the rest of America, that you shouldn't be able to impose the death penalty on anyone under 18, on anyone who is mentally ill, and as I recall, on anyone who is not represented by counsel. That was a shocking, because that was happening all over. So we went through that, and it made, I think, a big impact, and then we just never picked it up again because we have lots of other things going on. And finally, one day, somebody looked at it and said, oh my God, this is so grossly out of date, we need to do something. So there are two areas. One, we started out doing sentencing. I'm going to tell you how we do our work in a second because it explains why it takes us so long. And we have coming up now the second look issue, which I think is happily being focused on, although it's taken us a long time to get here. I think what the president has been doing and some other people in looking at these horrendously long sentences that have been given to people for criminal activity that now either we wouldn't give them that same sentence for, or they've been in prison and got college degrees and PhDs and other things, and something ought to happen to let them out before they are too old to have any sort of life at all. So we're going to have this, I think, very robust discussion about that. As we were in the process of doing sentencing, the reporters who did sentencing said they would do all of sentencing. This is now about 10 years ago. But they wouldn't do death penalty because that wasn't their area of expertise. And we said, that was okay. And then people who were opposed to the death penalty after 3 or 4 or 5 years got up on the floor of the annual meeting of the ALI and said, this is ridiculous. We have to do something about death penalty. So let me tell you how things work in the ALI. The ALI is a third scholars, a third judges, and a third lawyers from all over, private practice, prosecutors, government people, people who practice law in one way or another. When we do a project, we find an academic reporter. The reason for that is because we have to have somebody that's willing to take this unbelievable amount of time to write this stuff. We have a group of advisors, which we try to make balanced depending on whatever it is. So if we're doing torts, you have both plaintiffs' lawyers and defense lawyers, and we're doing American Indian law restatement, which I'm very proud of right now. And we have members not just of the tribes, but the government, and then lawyers who represent the tribes, and lawyers who litigate against the tribe and who represent business interests that interact. So we try very hard to do this. So what happens is that the reporters write stuff, and that's just a draft. And it's very important to me that this particular group understand how our system works. And it used to be that nobody paid any attention to these drafts, but now with the internet, we post them, okay? And anybody can comment, and then they go to this this group of advisors, and they say to them in very frank terms, often you have to have really thick skin to be a reporter. In fact, recently I've asked, and we now do this, that when somebody's a new reporter, we have them, before they do anything, go to some of the advisors group so they know it's not just them, that people are attacking in the most civil way. And the advisors look at it, then anybody who's a member of the American Law Institute can come to something called the Members Consultative Group, which is usually the next day. They read the drafts, they make all the suggestions, changes are made. Then it has to go to the Council of the American Law Institute, and we're sort of a bicameral body. in order for something to be the work of the American Law Institute, it has to be passed both by the council and at the annual meeting by the members. In fact, the sole job, really, and responsibility of being a member of the ALI is to go to the annual meeting and read these drafts and vote on whether it is or not. I tell you this because often, and this has been true in sentencing involving sexual assault in particular, but it's true across the board. We are doing a copyright project, and we're doing a privacy project, and we're doing a nonprofit project. This group would think, oh, who could have any strong feelings about any of that? Oh, you would be so wrong. And what has happened is that people think when we post the first draft that that's the work of the ALI. It is not the work of the ALI. It's the draft, and it's the way we start the conversation. And we end up always in a very different place, virtually always, than we started with, because academics have an academic mindset, and then you have judges looking at it who will say, as they did about sentencing in varying points, you know, if you're a state court judge and we're telling you that everybody should have a second look after 10 years, and you can't even handle the cases you have, right? And you say, great, where's the money going to come for this? Or if you're an elected judge, you'll say, great, I sentenced somebody and I'm up for election next year and you're going to want me, you know. So those kinds of conversations very much shape the substantive work that comes out. We have also, we're the ones that do restatements. So we have the restatements of the law. We have also principles projects, which are more like best practices in a way. And so while we have sexual assault in the model penal code as a matter of what the definition of the criminal law should be, we are doing a principles project about the procedures involving sexual assault on campuses. Because it's not, when it's turned over as a criminal matter, whatever's going to happen is, you know, is going to happen. But the question is, how do college campuses and university campuses handle the allegations of sexual assault, which turns out to be so unbelievably complicated? Young people doing things they may or may not remember even the next day, shouldn't do, all of it. And again, what are even the fact-finding things that ought to be done? How's the best way to handle it so that you both protect the victim and protect the rights of the accused? All of these very complicated things. But I'm very proud of what we do, not just because of the quality of the substance, but because of the quality of the conversation. And I'm especially proud of it in today's world in which I find political discourse so deeply troubling. Have any of you seen Hamilton? Or, yeah, no, I know. I mortgaged our house so we could go. So, but it was worth every, in fact, my husband doesn't know how much the tickets were, and I told him I will die with that secret in my heart. And it was worth every penny. We can't have a system of democracy without a couple of things. We can't have a system without compromise, okay? It's just, if you look at what happened, we wouldn't have a country if we hadn't had compromise. Some of the compromises were good, and some of them were pacts with the devil, but we couldn't have it without compromise. You can't have compromise without civil discourse. And I have never been more proud of being a lawyer or an American than the day that we had the death penalty discussion at the American Law Institute. We had people who were passionate on all sides, and some interesting, some people who had been in the Nuremberg trials, and they representing clients or prosecuting, they believed in the death penalty for treason. I mean, they really did. We had judges who had given death sentences and judges who had said, I can't do that. But there was a kind of listening that happened that I just don't think happens so much. And I come to you today, I guess having sat with you for an hour and learned what I did, to say that I'm very grateful for the work that each of you do. the criminal justice system in our country is not working right. But it's not because you aren't trying. It's because the rest of us don't understand. And I also say that's not enough. What you have to do now is go out of here and speak to all your friends who aren't lawyers, and to all the Rotary clubs, and all of the Kiwanis clubs, and all of the places that either have wrong information and no information, and find a way to communicate eloquently what the real situation is, what the impact is on the society, and what the positive impact would be if we could fix things. Thank you very much.